Okay.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining our Lunch and Learn. We hope that it brings you some ideas that you can take to your clients. And also, one of the things that I like to think of, it makes you think about things that we just sometimes take for granted and maybe we don't think of the alternatives. And that's a couple of our items today that we want to talk about is thinking about some options that maybe are not presented to clients because everybody seems to be sold on one idea. So, with that, for all of you that are on the phone that are fathers, happy Father's Day. We are uh, having this lunch and learn kind of as something that fathers and grandfathers can do or grandparents can do. Uh, Maybe a little bit of repackaging old ideas, but a little different spin on them. So, the first one I want to talk about is 529 plans. Uh, Everybody seems to think that 529 plans are the absolute best thing to do to fund for college education. And I'm not going to say they aren't, but there seldom are things that are 100% right or 100% wrong. There's always some percentage it may not fit for or may be different for them. So that's what I want to talk about, present to you today. So is everybody familiar with 529 plans? Everybody? Okay. Well, we talk about that being accumulated for college education, but there are other ways that it can be used. It can be used for trade and vocational schools, apprenticeship programs. There are a number of things it can be used for. However, it may be that there's money left in that 529 plan after the beneficiary has completed their education process. And the question becomes what happens with that then? So you could give it to siblings or grandchildren or whoever. But again, depending on how much money you've set aside, there may be some issues. You can move some of the money to uh, Roth IRAs. There's a lifetime limit of $35,000. You know, if somebody's putting aside $10,000 a year for their grandchild beginning at birth, they're going to be well over that $35,000. So, what we want to look at is what happens possibly if someone gets to the period of time when that beneficiary is older and they don't have anything to spend the money on. Then you start talking about having to withdraw that money and the could have a 10% penalty, just like an IRA, as well as some income taxes on the gain. Because as long as it sits in the 529 for educational purposes, the growth is tax free. But if you have to withdraw it, you may run into some problems if it's withdrawn for things other than an education. Does everybody follow that so far?
Yep.
Okay, everybody aware of those because it is a government sponsored and an IRS sponsored plan. So it's not really considered qualified money, but it does have a lot of restrictions like a qualified plan would. Okay. So what I want to talk about then is let's see. Let me see if I can get out of this and go to what I want to show. So this is what I want to show is what happens if we do this versus life insurance. So here's a 529 comparison. And we're really talking about for the more affluent families because you have a lot of grandparents out there and we've got some probably some grandparents on the phone. We probably have some parents on the phone too. The grandparents may have an IRA that they're required to take a minimum distribution out every year. We get this question a lot. What do you do with the RMD? A lot of them don't know really what to do with it. Well, let's take that and spend it for the grandchildren because the grandparents don't typically want to give the child, the son or the daughter money because it's going to get used for those expenses. And I think we've all been there as parents when you're in your 30s and 40s, there's not a lot of money left over, but you don't want to go ask your parents for money. But the grandparents say, well, maybe we can give $10,000 a year to the grandchildren or whatever that RMD is. So what I want to do is show what that is compared to putting into a life insurance contract. We've talked about this before. There's some reasons for this because a lot of you can't sell the 529 plan. Those are going to be mutual based funds, okay? Mutual funds based. And if you're not securities licensed, you can't participate in the sales of that. But you can participate in the sales of a life insurance contract. The second thing was we've also looked at some consequences from the taxation side is there are some IRS restrictions on 529 plans, including the withdrawals. And then there are in that way, it kind of limits how much you can put in 529 plans. So looking at an alternative, I'm not going to tell you that life insurance is going to be better than the 529 plan. I'm saying it's an alternative. So what I've done here is we have a life insurance illustration at 6.59% interest on an IUL chassis. If we compare that to a mutual fund at $10,000, you've got to pay some expenses. The mutual funds are not free. It's probably going to be a 3 to 5% load on the mutual funds, depending on if anybody has funds with that company. But at the end, when they get to be, and this was for a 2-year-old, I believe it was. So when they get 16 years out there, they're going to start taking out $20,000 for educational purposes. But at the end of when they graduate in 4 years, if they do graduate in 4 years, they'd still have $238,000 of money in that 529 plan. What are you going to do with the $238,000? I think that might become a concern. You really can't use that to run the first house for the kid or anything like that. So if we look over here, I ran cash value account on a 2-year-old, a 40-year-old father, and a 70-year-old grandfather. So if you're going to write insurance, which would be the best one to insure? Well, if we look, interestingly enough, insuring after 20 years, insuring the 40-year-old male is better than insuring the 2-year-old male. Why is that? Because you got a lot more death benefit on a 2-year-old male than you do a 40-year-old male. And we all know that the expenses in insurance policies today are based on a per thousand of the initial face amount. Therefore, believe it or not, the 2-year-old is probably going to have more expenses on that policy than the 40-year-old.
Makes
Okay.
sense.
The other thing is, I don't know of a company out there that will give a juvenile a preferred non-smoker rating. They usually put them in as standard non-smoker. Therefore, I think that, and if you look at the 70-year-old, the 70-year-old stays pretty close, but as they start getting up in their 80s, that difference starts to widen. Okay. So I would suggest you do it on the 40-year-old. But if you do that, you've got to consider that 70-year-old is not going to be around forever. So what's going to happen if a death benefit were to get paid on the 70-year-old versus the 40-year-old? Well, I've got this. For the first 10 years, you'd be better off having insured the 70-year-old because the death benefit there of 136 is greater than the cash value of the 40-year-old's policy. But then you start getting into the negative as that 70-year-old becomes 80, 85, 90. Still not a lot of difference, but some difference. Again, another reason to insure the 40-year-old instead of the 2-year-old is if something were to happen to one of them, let's take the 40-year-old, there's a need for that 2-year-old and the family to have cash value or death benefit from life insurance. If something happens to the 2-year-old, it's certainly an emotional loss, but it's probably not going to be a financial loss. Okay. So another reason to insure the 40-year-old. So with that said, if we even went further, I didn't do this, but if you had that tax deferred and now at 30 years old, you take $50,000 out of the policy for that fund, that first house, you're still going to be fairly close in the cash value on the 40-year-old. You're going to be at 354 versus 428. Okay. But you continue to defer that and you don't have to worry about any income tax problems as you go along. So that is an alternative to 529 plans, in my opinion. The other thing, and we've talked about on past lunch and learns, is that the 529 plan is in the market. The life insurance is in an IUL, where the returns are, based on the S&P 500, but it's considered a non-correlated asset because you got the 0% floor on these IUL policies. And in past lunch and learns, we have looked at what that means when the market is down and withdrawing money out of these funds or accounts in down years. And there, in that point, there's a clear benefit to having money in the life insurance contract or like values in a non-correlated asset. Okay. So that is another reason to consider life insurance for anything over and above. I'm saying put money in 529s, but I wouldn't put this much money in a 529 because another thing, the kid could get a scholarship. Now, what are you going to do with that money? So to look at this, if you were going to use 7% interest, I'm just going to show this to you, and you put $4,000 aside, and they took $20,000 a year out, you'd still be above that $35,000 threshold for rolling it over to a Roth IRA. So I'm going to stop here and see if you have any questions, see if that maybe opened up some eyes about maybe using life insurance as an alternative to 529 plans and actually approaching some of your grandparents that you know that are getting RMDs that don't know what to do with them. Because quite frankly, we got fathers and grandfathers and mothers and grandmothers on this call. Typically, the grandparents have more spendable money than the second generation. The second generation is still paying for diapers and baby food and maybe private school, etc. Grandma and grandpa don't have those expenses. So I'll stop there. Does anybody have any questions on this before we go to the next one?
Ralph, I just have one question. If you've got more left over in the 529 plan, what's the out strategy? How do you get that money out other
Well,
than the
the
Roth?
absolute worst case scenario is you wind up paying taxes on the growth and possibly a 10% premature withdrawal penalty. I'll go back to that slide. Let's see.
Is that 59 and a half have an influence on the 10%?
I don't believe it does. I don't believe it does. Yeah, you've got a lot of options. I mean, you can spend them Frank, you can spend a lot of the 529 funds on a lot of different options. You can give it to a lot of different people. I'm just saying, anybody who wants to put aside larger sums of money may not want to do it in a 529 plan.
Okay.
Okay. Just again, another option. Now,
Hey,
one of
Ralph.
the,
Karen has a question in the chat. She said, is the owner, grandparent, insurance parent, and child or trust beneficiary? Are you asking Karen who the owner would be of a policy like that?
okay, well, that's a good question, Karen. I would start off with the grandparent being the owner, okay, and then naming the child as a contingent owner. Because if you name the child as the owner, guess what happens? Then the child has all the rights to the value. Okay. Now, and you certainly can't name the 2-year-old. If you want to go so far as to name a trust, you could, but I would probably stop with the child unless the child is really a spendthrift. Because if you name the child as the contingent owner, and the owner, i.e. the grandparent, does pass away, then the child becomes the owner. Okay. So that's a little bit of a hurdle, but you're going to have the same hurdle with the 529 plans. Okay. That answer your question? Oh, one other thing too that I didn't mention about insuring the 40-year-old. You also probably would be able to have multiple. So if you want to do $10,000, you could have this split out among 3 children too, and just do it all in one policy. Okay, or you could have a policy for each. It's not much more expensive to have a policy for each than it is 3 policies, 3 beneficiaries under one policy. And if you do the first where you have 3 policies, then you don't have any squabbling among kids as to whose value is being used up. All right.
Hey, Ralph, one
I
more
actually
thing.
looked at females, and
Mhm.
believe it or not, the males outperform the values for the males outperform the value for the females.
That's surprising.
Yes.
One more thing. Karen's asking, who is beneficiary, trust rather than parent?
Well, it would depend on the value of the estate for the grandparents. If the grandparents don't have a taxable estate, I would probably name the grandparents. But if they have a taxable estate and concerned about that, I would name the parents or the spouse as the beneficiary, or whoever the guardian is for the child. That would be more of a, rather than having just kind of a blanket answer. And I think that would probably be more of a case by case answer, and depending on the family situation, because we all know families who have 3 kids and they're all great, they're all very financially astute, and then we have other families where their children where maybe one is more financially astute than the others, and another may have a drug problem. So that's more of I think a personal decision to be made at the time, rather than just a blanket recommendation. And quite frankly, it's, I talk about these gurus that you hear on TV where they make or the radio where they make these blanket recommendations, and I just have to scratch my head because what's good for one person is not always good for the next person. So, all right. Any other questions?
I think I saw that Leslie had asked, what makes an estate taxable?
It's about $30 million for husband and wife, $15 million a person. Okay. Now, that is federal estate tax. I should stop there. You need to look at your state estate taxes too, because they can be triggered by different things. And I'm not going to sit here and try to learn all 50 estate tax laws or talk about, because they're all different. Okay, but that is a minority of the tax as compared to the federal estate tax. Okay. Now, let's say you got somebody who maybe does not want to spend quite as much money. Oh, here are the illustrations, by the way. I have those, but let's say you got somebody that's got some grandkids, and we've talked about this before, and I really like this idea. In fact, as everybody knows, I don't have do a lot of personal business, but I have presented this to 3 grandparents and sold 6 to one grandparent, 3 to another grandparent, 3 to the third grandparent. So I had 12 selling this idea by just asking. And what this idea is, for those of you who haven't seen it, is let's provide the grandchild with a birthday present on their birthday as long as they live. It can either be the grandchild's birthday or it could be the grandparent's birthday. Sometimes the grandchild might get lost with all the other presents they're getting, whereas this comes on grandpa's birthday or grandma's birthday. Now all of a sudden they remember that, oh yeah, grandpa was born in June. It may not know the exact day, but I'm looking forward to my money from Grandpa. He's remembered me. And it's a small deal. Here, this is a 2-year-old male. You put aside $10,000, and let's say you purchased it. This was yesterday. And for those who want to send birthday presents, this is my birthday, February 21st. So you can remember that. You know, send money. You can send money, no problem. But if you did that, that $10,000 for the 2-year-old is going to turn out to $570 a year, guaranteed as long as that child lives. If that child lives to 100, he's going to get 98 payments of $571. And to me, it's a lot of grandparents have money sitting aside if they can spend 10,000 on a grandchild, 4, 5, 6 of them. We all know those people have $10,000 sitting in their checking account, right? Why not do this and give it to their kids? All right. Now, one of the problems we run into, and again, this in all disclosure, we've had some issue with these companies understanding how to write an annuity where the owner is different than the annuitant. Okay. So we ran into that problem. I won't mention the company, but you don't see them on the list anymore because they struggle to get the contracts issued. Okay. Now we have some that'll go under 10,000, but you get down into a lot less benefit being paid and a lot less choices of insurance companies. Okay. All right. Any questions about that? Any comments? Okay. Now, the last thing that we talked about in our points to talk about was what to do when your client gets rated. And first of all, I want to talk about, I think there's a large misconception about what a table rating means. And this is how I've talked to an advisor who places rating cases, and this is how he explains it. So if we've got a preferred risk, and let's say they're 50 years old, the insurance company thinks that preferred risk is going to live for 30 years. So they're going to get 30 years of premium, and then they're going to pay that claim in 30 years. The insurance company knows how much money they're going to earn on all that money that comes to them. So they know what the premium needs to be charged to be able to have that money in 30 years. Okay? If someone is now, let's say they're table B or 2, whatever you want to, insurance companies either use 2 or numbers or letters. But what a table 2 means is it doesn't mean, David, that something is wrong with you tomorrow and something's going to happen to you in the next year. What the insurance company is saying is now, as a 50-year-old, your life expectancy is not 30 years, it's only 25 years. So what does the insurance company have to do? They have to get 25 years. They got to get that claim amount in 25 years, but they got 5 years less to get it. So they got to pay a little extra premium for that. So, David, it doesn't mean anything's going to happen to you today. It just means due to that health problem, due to the diabetes that you got, that your A1C is 8, that you're not taking care of, or the fact that you had a stroke 3 years ago, that means you don't have the same life expectancy as a 50-year-old male who has no medical problems, taking no medications, etc. Now, I will also tell you this, David, that what we see historically is that people's health does not get better. There's some rare circumstances. I'm not going to say always, but normally your health doesn't get better. So when someone gets rated, you need to go back to them and say, you know what, David? Yeah, the company has said that you're table two, that you're going to pay more premium for the life insurance. But you know what? I think you either, this might be the last time you get to buy life insurance. You either need to buy permanent insurance or you need to buy as much as you think you're going to need in the rest of your life. Because one thing is, if you've had a health issue and you're a table B today, and something happens to you in the next 4 years, you're not going to be table B the next time you try to go through underwriting. You're going to be table D, E, F, something like that, or worst, uninsurable. So that's why we talk about how to place these rated cases, because a lot of times it's a little unexpected by the insured. Because guess what? The insured is being told, "Oh, you're fine. You don't have any problems.
Yep.
You're good." Well, the
Doctor point of
underwriter
view.
looks at it differently than the doctor does.
Yep.
The doctor is looking at that as, David, what can I do today to make your life better, to make you feel better? The underwriter is looking at this as if, what effect has this ailment had on David's life expectancy? So we're looking at it as two different ways. So that's another one of the responses that we get when we talk about rated cases is the insurance says, the doctor says I'm fine. Well, yes, you're fine today, but based on your health condition, statistics tell us your life expectancy is 2-3 years shorter, whatever that number may be. So the insurance company has to charge you a little higher premium for it. Now, don't know if anybody's ever thought about that as how you have to explain rated cases, but that is one thing to do. Now, the other thing that I'll mention while we're right here at this point in time is, we're seeing a lot of ads for Ethos and some of these onlines, Select Quote and all those. And what is it? Is it Big Al? Isn't that one of them? All of those online companies they're based on volume. Okay. So when David comes back in and he has a little bit of an issue, that brokerage agency is not going to fight for a better rating for David. David's case isn't going to make a big difference to him one way or the other. So they either tell David he's got to pay the table 4 rates or move on. And that's where we help you. We come in and we're going to fight for the carrier to move it to the best underwriting class we can. And if it's not XYZ carrier, we're going to go to ABC because we think ABC is going to give you a standard rate. I don't think you're going to get that kind of service when your clients are talking to the internet providers of term insurance. So to recap, we talked about 3 things today, and I hope that you've gotten something out of it. We've talked about the 529 plans. So how can a grandparent use that? Typically, that's what we hope we can get, is getting the grandparent to use some of their RMD for life insurance. Secondly, we talked about a lifetime gift for grandchildren. Or you can do it for your kid, but if your kid's 40 years old, you're not going to get $500 a year for $10,000. And then lastly, we talked about how to overcome rated cases or when the insurance company tells you that your client is not a triathlete. In fact, we had one, I say triathlete, but some of these triathletes actually don't get the preferred rate because of their heart rate and their body weight is so low that they're actually don't quite qualify for the preferred best ratings. So keep that in mind too. It's kind of to me an interesting thing, but that we find that they typically have some other issues other than just being a marathon runner. So with that, I'm going to stop. I'll answer any questions anybody has. Like I said, we want to try to keep this to 30 or 40 minutes. Hope that we've done that. I hope we've given you some ideas that you can take and use in your practice. And like I said, if you have any questions, either please ask them now, or you can send David or me an email. David is D Moreland, Moreland, at brokerhouseins.com. And I am R Moore, Moore, at brokerhouseins.com. All right. Does anybody have anything
Seemed like I saw a text from Leslie.
to you or to me?
Looks like we got a couple of texts in the group chat.
Okay.
Randy, I will send you a recording.
Yeah. And somebody's asking what state we're in. I'm in Alabama. Yeah. And somebody said they're in Georgia. They've seen a lot of rain.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's the question. Okay. There's a question in here. Says, how do companies look at someone who's had hypertension, but due to weight loss, a healthier lifestyle, the hypertension is resolved? That right now, there are a lot of companies that will give Preferred Plus with controlled blood pressure medication. So if they have gotten off their medication, the question would be how long they have been off, because sometimes an underwriter is going to look at that worse than if they had been on medication and controlled, because now they're in a window. Is their blood pressure really going to stay controlled if they're off their medication? Okay. I think that we still probably could get them the preferred best, but you know that actually is, from an underwriter standpoint, is probably not is probably a takeaway instead of an add to, until they've been off the medication for some time.
And we've got some questionnaires we can send out to help really get the information together, and then we can shop it out to about 15 carriers at the same time and find the best carrier for that person.
Yeah. One other thing too that I'll mention here on weight loss, especially now with all the GLP-1 stuff going on out there and people losing 20, 30, 40 pounds. That's all still new. So I don't know how the underwriter is going to look at those weight changes now. But historically, if someone has lost 50 pounds in the last year, because we all know they ask the question, have you had a weight change in the past 12 months? They typically take half of the weight change and add it back into the current weight to meet the height and weight tables. Because I guess history has told them over time that if someone has a large weight loss in 12 months and they stop, then half of it comes back on. Okay. That's not me saying that. That's the insurance underwriters. But that's how they typically look at that when there's been a weight loss situation. Okay. It also would raise some concern if it's not planned. That is one of the symptoms of someone who has cancer. Cancer turns into a weight loss issue also. Okay. Oh, let's see. Looks like I got another one. All right. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. I appreciate your time. Let us know how we can help you, and we'll be happy to, and we'll look forward to the next Lunch and Learn.
Thank you much, Ralph.
All right. Bye-bye.